Good afternoon and welcome to the Fall 2019 semester of Records Management University. We are broadcasting live from Fife Media Studios in historic Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Thank you for joining us today. We'll be getting started in just a moment. My name is Chris Petty, your Dean of Admissions and co-host of RMU, and I have a few housekeeping items for you before we begin. Because of our awesome turnout, we'll need to mute your phones and computer mics to avoid picking up any feedback or noise. If you have a question, please use the chat window located in the bottom right of the screen. I'll be monitoring the chat session and respond directly, or if relevant to the discussion, we'll have Dean Mitch address it. Over the next few days, you'll receive an email on how to receive a copy of today's recording, as well as other instructions on all things RMU, including credits and certifications. To those wishing to receive credits for RMU, information about them will be handed out at the end of this semester. To those students viewing this on demand, the credits do count just as much as viewing it live, although we do enjoy the live chat discussions. As you know, RMU is certified by the Institute of Certified Records Managers. It is an official credit qualifying course worth 1 certification maintenance point per class towards your recertification. To receive a pre-approval code for ICRM credits from Fife, you'll need to attend all 5 classes live or listen to all of the recorded sessions. If you aren't able to participate in all 5 classes, you can still receive ICRM credits, but you'll need to submit your own justification. Additionally, RMU is certified with the Association for Information and Image Management, or AIM. You can receive certified information professional credits from AIM by your participation in the live or recorded sessions. And so, without further ado, I'm handing the wheel over to Mitch Farbstein, our esteemed Dean of RMU. Mitch, take it away.
Great, Chris. Well, welcome back, all you records managers and risk records managers and records assistants and information lifecycle technologists, senior management, et cetera, for the 10th semester of Records Management University. So, Chris, the important thing is, in 10,000 words or less, how was your summer?
It was great.
It was great.
Yeah.
Good.
Spent some time at the pool, worked on my tan, you know.
All right, excellent, excellent. And I see you brought your bottle of Smart Water. I brought my bottle of Life Water. I'm not sure which one is more important, but I hope I live longer than you are smarter. That's all I got to say. So again, welcome everybody. I think this is going to be an interesting semester. The fall classes will focus on 5 real organizational case studies, reviewing their challenges, successes, and failures in implementing records management in an ever-evolving and modernizing records management environment. Obviously, I had to neuter the clients, but I really want to give you the experiences that we've had and other people have had in terms of actual implementation of your records management system or their records management system. If we look back just real quickly as being the 10th semester, we started back in the spring of 2015, and if you've participated in Records Management University in the past, you know that I do this kind of themed approach for each semester. So it kind of mixes it up. It gives you a different perspective. It gives you a little bit of a different education and knowledge about the world in general, because I think the world in general is what is generating the records in your organization. And so this semester, the 10th semester, is psychiatrists and psychologists. And I think it's very appropriate for a lot of the people that I talk to and myself, that sometimes, we got to take a step back and figure out psychologically what are we trying to achieve in our efforts to implement successful records management systems. So, as a lot of us know, there's a fine line between genius and insanity, and I've erased this line, at least for me. One of the definitions of insanity is doing the same thing over and over and expecting different results. As records managers, we need to be cognizant of our actions, understand the results, and alter our actions if the results do not indicate success. Geniuses don't always get it right the first, second, or third time. I'm a perfect example of that. Not the genius, but not getting it right the first, second, and third time. However, they recognize and strategize alternatives to achieve success. Records management is really no different. Records management is not a math problem. There's no exact answer to how to implement and how to be successful in records management, like 2 + 2 = 4. That's an absolute, as far as we know. So somebody like Einstein was considered a genius because he predicted events that during his lifetime could not actually be observed, but proven out later as later dates as better tools became available. And he was wrong a lot of times, and in many cases corrected by his wife Maleva, who did not get the credit that she deserves, making Albert a genius. As such, geniuses do not live in a vacuum and require input from other resources. Hence, to become a records management genius, it's important to become a records management genius, you need input from many sources and help from others. You're not going to do it by yourself. It's just impossible from what we've seen in the organizations that we have dealt with. Okay, so why does Dean Mitch hate records management? Okay, so this is now session 1. I'll have 4 more to come in the next several weeks. I hate it because I'm always thinking about it, and that's kind of sad. You have a life outside of records management, but a lot of times I just think about what are better ways to, number one, impart the knowledge that I've gotten over the years. I mean, I've been in the tech industry for about 40 years now. I've been in records management probably almost 30 of those years. And I've seen the transition from different types of technologies, different types of requirements over those 30 years. And really this amazing transition from physical records to electronic records. But if physical records still exist in many, many forms, images, or paper-based, you have microform, microfiche, and so on. And now you're encountering all these other things, other in the social media world, also the tweets. And what do you do with it? How do you manage it? And it's getting much more sophisticated. And so for records managers to be successful, you got to keep improving your knowledge and your skills. So I have an extra region in my brain, and that extra region is called the record manager's miss. and that's always turned on for me, and it's actually good, and I enjoy it. Talk to tons of records managers that like the ARMA show, the National ARMA show, AIM shows, and different, just encountering different individuals, high-level individuals, medium-level individuals who are running programs out there that are handling hundreds, if not millions, of different types of records and managing them successfully and sometimes unsuccessfully. The combination, as I said, to become a genius is you got to understand a lot of areas. It's just not those who are successful, because you have to build toward that success. So that's why, at least this week, I hate records management. I don't get a break. Okay, so the syllabus for this semester is we have 5 classes. I won't read through all these, but these are the different, what I would call our themed leaders for each of the classes. The first one we'll talk about today is Sigmund Freud. Next one is K. Redfield Jameson, Herman Rorschach, Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, Abraham Maslow. Some of these you may have heard of, some of them maybe not. But in their own right, they were genius in terms of what they did and the kinds of psychiatric problems that they, spent their life trying to help others, and that's really what it's about. Okay, so psychology versus psychiatry. Some people get this mixed up. Basically, psychology, or psychiatry, let's go to that one first, is trained medical doctors. They can give medication. It's just a different approach to handling people who have challenges, I wouldn't call them abnormal or mental challenges, but there's something that's disruptive to them as an individual that they're seeking help for. And the psychologists are not medical doctors. They can't prescribe drugs, but they treat emotional and mental suffering in a different way. Okay, a different type of approach. And both of these are successful, and both of these can help the individual. So leading from that, we're going to go into my buddy here, Sigmund Shlomo Freud, born in Austria in 1856, died in 1939, right when the war in Europe was really kicking up. He's the founder of psychoanalysis and psychodynamic approach. This book that you see here, it's amazing. It was one of the first books in my freshman year that I got in college, I don't know, almost 45 years ago. God, I'm old. And it's amazing. I was looking closely at it. It's $1.25. That's probably the cheapest book I've ever seen at a college bookstore. So he was the founder of this, and it was basically based on behavior formulated by the unconscious mind. Okay. There were his three key elements were the id, the ego, and the superego. And basically what that is, for example, if the ego gives in to the id's demands, the superego may make the person feel bad through guilt. This is all going on in the same person's brain. It's very interesting. It's very controversial. But in terms of, you asked anybody, tell me one of the most famous psychiatrists or psychologists, and he was a medical doctor, so he's really a psychiatrist. The first person that typically people mention is Sigmund Freud. But there was a tremendous amount of controversy around him. He fled Vienna to London in 1938 to escape the Nazis. He suggested therapy dogs for patient relaxation. I think this is kind of interesting because with what's going on, typically what you see on the airlines today,
Yeah.
and people can bring, different kinds of pets, ostriches. I don't know what they bring anymore, but I see it all the time because I do a lot of flying. So he did contribute something amazingly cool that people really hadn't thought about until, in the 30s and the 20s. Nobel Prize nominee 13 times, but never awarded, which is interesting because I think, again, his stuff was very controversial. It was very sexually oriented, if you've studied anything about him. And then he emphasized the use of patient couches. So every time you see something about Freud, there's a couch in the room. And in a lot of cases, that's how therapists work today. You lay down on the couch, you get relaxed rather than being stiff in a chair.
The furniture industry loves him.
Oh, absolutely. So each of the next 4 courses, including today, I'm just going to bring up a different malady. I think it's interesting just from a knowledge perspective. But I think we all face these kinds of things when we're trying to understand either typically why we're not achieving the goals that we want. And it's based on a lot of different challenges and variables within your organization that kind of prevents you from doing it. But you have the ability to at least try to control it and be successful. Okay, so psychosis is an abnormal condition of the mind. And really, the symptoms may include false beliefs or delusions and seeing or hearing things that others do not see or hear. The whole thing about the last statement, hearing things that others do not see, but hear in particular, a lot of times our success comes from good communications, all right? And a lot of times things are misinterpreted. And it's important because of your position as records manager to communicate as clearly as possible. We all know that records management, and I've said this in every class, is really painful for the organization. They typically don't want to do it. It's costly. It's an enterprise solution that is very, very difficult to implement because you have such a tremendous inventory of content, and that content you don't necessarily own. It's owned by IT or it's owned by the application that IT is running. So it's HR, it's manufacturing, it's financials. You don't own it, but you're being assigned to manage it. Okay. And that communication with these different groups and with IT and with senior management, you become kind of a focal point in terms of getting something done that typically people don't want to spend the effort to do. And so your role is very, very important to being successful in the records management arena within your organization. Okay, so psychological analysis. So what we're going to do in each of the classes, just to kind of set the framework for this, we're going to do on each of the 5 cases we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about the exploration of it, the analysis of it, the corrective actions, and the resolution. This is pretty standard psychoanalysis. Okay, and basically that says, what is the records management abnormality, if you want to call it that? Why does the records management abnormality exist? Who can help the organization become records management normal, whatever that may be? What are the available records management analysis protocols? What are the corrective records management actions to be taken? And how is the patient progressing as you go along these steps? Okay, so I'm going to take 3 seconds and take a drink from my life water. Okay,
And everyone in the audience can find a couch to lay down on, and
like I
we'll
said,
perform
I can't extend their life, but maybe I'll make them smarter, right? You know.
And we're not actually psychiatrists or psychologists, so anything we say, don't hold it against us.
All right, so we'll start off with the exploration. So this initial review is the third time is the charm, and I'll tell you why I selected that as kind of the title for this. All right, so here's this customer of Fithe's who has about 100,000 mailboxes, so they're not small. And we're in the next bunch of weeks, we're going to talk about small organizations as well, because they all of them are of a different flavor and a different approach depending on the size of the organization and the kind of content the organization typically works with. Comprehensive solution for all types of e-records. So I'm including e-records, emails, PowerPoints, file share, SharePoint, whatever system, HR systems that generate content that's considered as part of the organization and the records that need to be maintained for whatever their retention and disposition schedule dictates. And a lot of times that's also dictated not by the organization itself, but the industry that they are in. The third one is an enterprise platform. This is always a challenge. And I think what happens in a lot of cases, I mean, mail is easier probably than anything else because you're coming from one or several servers, let's say Exchange servers or Google servers for your emails. And it comes into a central location, or maybe it comes from a distributor, but they're all coming through the same avenue in a sense. And so these emails come in, you capture them, you can store them, you can auto-categorize, you can do those kinds of things. When you are dealing with the other enterprise solutions, like I mentioned before, whether it be financial, it's HR, and so on, you have content that's generated and collected into those systems. And how you interact with them adds a complex layer that the IT people and yourself and your IG group, information governance group, need to pay attention to. So the enterprise platform is one of the things that this particular customer wanted to do. They didn't want it just for email. They just didn't want it for electronic documents, or they just didn't want it for physical documents, which is another aspect of this exploration. They had a lot of encrypted email and e-content based on who this organization is. Encrypted emails, if you're not familiar with that, really locks that document down. And unless you have the keys, and there's various kinds of keys to encrypted email and e-content per se, unless you have the keys, you can't open it. So now you're collecting all these emails that nobody can read except the person who received it in the first place, but they're typically working outside of the, let's say, the records repository. So when a records manager has to look at it, they don't have the keys. So encryption of content is a very important piece of the puzzle for a lot of organizations that are out there. Particularly, I find a lot of it in the government. I find a lot of it in certain areas of manufacturing where intellectual property is very important, like the pharmaceutical industry, because they're moving content around and they really need to lock it down so other eyes can't see what they're producing. Extremely high level of security, various levels that say, let's say, I'm Mitch. Okay, I'm in Philadelphia right now, and the content that I'm looking at has certain levels of security on them. If I now move to China, all right, I may no longer have access to that. That's very important in how you control that and how you manage that level of security. And it adds a great degree of complexity on your records management system, because in a lot of cases, these permissions and these assignments of security need to be added to every bit of the content that you're storing in your records repository. And then the other thing that they needed, okay, was a DoD 5015.02 JITC certification for records management in all chapters. If you're not familiar with this, the DoD is the Department of Defense. JITC is a certifying agency that actually reviews the product, deep dives the product, makes sure it does what it says it's going to do, I'm sure a lot of you have heard of it. I'm sure a number of you, particularly in the commercial world, have not. And so from the commercial side, a lot of people will say, why do I even need it? And the idea is, no, you don't necessarily need it. The benefit is that this is about the only third-party certification organization that certifies records management systems. And so that's why this particular organization wanted it, because they wanted to just check it off. It's done. I know it's going to do what it's supposed to do. Okay, so we just kind of gone through the exploration part of the steps that we're going to take. So the next one is analysis. So we looked at what this customer needed to do and what they were trying to achieve. So in this particular case, this customer of Fife failed to achieve success with two previous solutions. One was they tried to build a custom application, internal custom application. That in a sense is maybe years ago when there weren't that many products out there, particularly for electronic records. People kind of chose that because they had the resources to do it, and they figured, okay, we have the IT resources, let's build our own, it'll be cheaper, we'll use the tools that we know, and we can move forward with that. The thing that they don't recognize is that your records management system is long-term. People come, people go. And if you don't have a consistent support team to keep moving the technology along for 25 years, 50 years, whatever your disposition schedule is, or permanent, it's somewhat of a challenge to keep moving to the new operating systems, the new databases, the new cybersecurity, and so on. And so they tried to do it, didn't work. Okay, they recognized it as their first step. The next step they did, they tried to modify SharePoint to manage their records with a third-party plugin. They found that that didn't work for them as well. There's certain complexities in there. It wasn't a DoD certified solution. And SharePoint is good to a certain extent. It has a record center in it. The challenge there is when you start ingesting millions and hundreds of millions of records, SharePoint, you have to propagate multiple SharePoint sites, and it gets very, very expensive to be able to do that. Next one was we talked a little bit about before, the encrypted emails, and there are tools out there, and we've worked with some that will decrypt emails as they come into the system and then expose the content. And that exposure is only for certain individuals. You don't want it to be exposed to everybody because it was encrypted for a reason, but not everybody should have access to it. So what you do is you decrypt it, and then you add a layer of permissions as to who can see what, a little bit what we talked about before. Required levels of security integration of identity management systems. If you're not familiar with identity management system, the first step in that is something typically called Active Directory and single sign-on. And that's really, fairly standard stuff in the industry right now. And basically, if you log in one way in single sign-on, it allows you to log in to all your applications. Makes it easier, but it still has to be maintained. Active Directory has who you are, what your permissions are, but permissions in terms of accessing the system, not necessarily permissions as to what kind of documents you can look at. The next step of identity management is there are custom applications out there that are very, very complex, that go beyond the Active Directory and go beyond single sign-on, that need to be managed for certain organizations because of the security levels that are required. So there's this combination in the security side of things, and this is all what I would call back-end cybersecurity. There's the idea that people are trying to get into your system, okay, and a lot of this has to do with who you are and everything else. But then once you're in the system, there's also this identity management component that plays, because you have to check and make sure that the credentials of an individual who's coming or going are managed properly. And that's why it's an identity management solution. You're typically not managing at that level in your records management system. You want to tap that resource whenever people want to look at certain documents or content, I should say. The other thing is they needed processes for case management. And I'm going to use case management as an umbrella term here for managing content, okay, that are typically records, and they typically want to, in some cases, keep that content within the single repository. So certain organizations have case management systems or e-discovery systems or other types of systems that they need to first extract the content through e-discovery and then move it to another system, manipulate it in whatever way they want to. They're not changing it, but manipulate it, make copies, and so on, in an external, let's say, case management system. But then that content becomes another record. And what these folks wanted to do is just keep the stuff where it is. I don't want to send the stuff out and have it, external, and then have to worry about getting it back in and having duplicate records potentially for this content. So they wanted to do Freedom of Information Act, declassification of documents, classification of documents, a lot of different things with the content that they already were storing as records. Next one is secure organization collaboration. This is interesting, where, and this leads us a little bit back to the psychology piece, because if you have individuals that have to be vetted or reviewed or whatever through outside agencies or groups or psychologists to get, in this particular case, a clearance, let's say, you need to be able to collaborate with them in a secure environment. So what that means is you have these particular records, and you need to share them outside of your group, outside of your organization, but you need to make sure that they are controlled. So this is one of the things that this organization needed to be able to do. But again, it's keeping the content within the confines of the records management system, but opening up like a back door for other organizations to explore, review, make their findings, and report on that, but they're always connected. Next one is pre-processing and packaging what I call non-journal emails. So journal emails, if you take Exchange or Google Mail, and you are collecting these, let's say you're collecting them in 365 in the cloud, let's say you have your own Exchange servers, however you're doing that, a lot of times it just gets journaled, meaning that a copy is sent to the records management system. But in a lot of cases, you also have other things that before that activity happened, people were saving their emails in what's known as a PST file. And a PST file is basically packaging up, let's say, 1,000 emails for an individual. And then those have to be ingested into the records management system. But a lot of times you need to pre-process them too before they go into the records management system, because you want to add on different security, different levels of categorization, whatever you want to do before you put them in the records management system. So this agency needed to do pre-processing and pre-packaging of non-journal emails. Differentiating classification, categorization. A lot of times we hear the idea of, okay, I need to classify my documents. Okay, classification and categorization are two completely different things. Classification, we go back to the security things that I was talking about, adds the access permissions to a particular document, and the classification is it a classified document, is it an unclassified document, and there's other classifications under that. The categorization really says, okay, this is an HR document and it's a review document, and so you go through that granular step or that hierarchy of categorization, and obviously the more granular you get, the more effort is required to do that. So those are two different things, but in certain cases, you need both classification and categorization, and that's what this organization needed. And then third-party contractors managing the solution. We run into this a lot. When a system is brought in, the organization has already contracted for services, with a big, it could be an integrator, it can be just a third party that provides this technical support to the organization. So sometimes, that becomes a little bit disruptive, because you have to kind of train them up as to how to implement the system, where in a lot of organizations, the vendor's allowed to basically do that. So in this particular case, and one of the challenges was they have third-party contractors that needed to be spun up so they can actually implement the solution. Chris, I'm going to stop for a second, see if there's any questions, or are we still good?
Yeah, so we actually have one question that just came up. Are you using categorization as functional or faceted?
Define that for the audience, because I think most people don't. I'm not sure. I mean, if I think you're saying faceted, I think you're multiple categories, but I'm not.
You'll have to defer to our audience member here who posed the question.
Yeah, or we can come back to it. Maybe
Yeah.
they'll give it to us, and we can, because you can have multiple categories for the same document. Okay, and what will happen is the disposition of that document, how it's handled, will typically adopt or inherit the longest standing period of time that you need to save that record. Okay, and that's typically what happens. The thing about that is you only truly want one copy of that record and apply multiple categories to it.
Right.
And then based on the category, tap the disposition time frame, and then that the system will track that very easily. It's a lot easier to do this in electronic records management than physical records management, because that's just very, very difficult, because you're trying to do this on a spreadsheet, and doing it that way, you don't have automatic notification of disposition typically from a spreadsheet.
Right. Right. Yeah, we didn't get clarification on that question, but another user did ask about if we could expand on classification versus categorization. I think, classification typically it's coming down to security, right?
Typically, yeah. Categorization, typically you want to use categorization almost everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, everybody has to categorize documents or
Right.
content, right? Like I said, it could be different levels of categorization, however granular you want to do that. And if you're assigning granularity and multiple levels of categorization, you also have to apply the other properties. And one of those properties is length of time that you're going to keep it, okay? And freezing those records. And, here's the cool thing about categorization and auto-categorization. I was going to say this for later, but I'll talk about it now. Auto-categorization is great. It takes some work to set up, and it depends on how many levels you want to go. If you want to go 1, 2 levels, it's pretty straightforward, because if you go multiple levels of categorization and differentiation between those categories, it's, the human being sometimes can't figure it out. Okay, so now you're asking to apply rules in the computer. They may do it faster, but it becomes there isn't that much of a degree of difference between this category and that category as you go down the levels. Now, the most important thing about what I just said is you typically, a lot of reasons, one of the big reasons that you save records, as we know, is for e-discovery, right? And typically e-discovery, if nothing more than I need to find the document from this person, okay, then it doesn't matter what the category is. So you're not really doing e-discovery on categories per se. You're doing e-discovery really on the content.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so if you kind of balance content with metadata tagging, what I would call, for the indexing values, and the categorization, the more structured organization, where the full text and unstructured way, that's where you're going to get most of your bang for the buck. So there's a balance there. So getting back to the classification has nothing to do with that. Okay, classification is assignment of what I mentioned a little bit earlier. Is the organization determines what are classified documents and what are not. What can I share with the public? What can I not share with the public? How long do I keep it? How do I go through, and I mentioned very quickly before, the process of declassification, where you have records that have been out there for 20, 25, 50 years, and now it's time to declassify it. It could be things like what happened in certain enclaves during the Vietnam War. What happened when NASA had an explosion with one of the rockets. Those kinds of things are in a lot of cases classified. The census information in effect. Up till 75 years, I think can be considered as classified information that's not released for 75 years. So that's what classification is about. It's basically trying to hide the content from the public. And I'm not saying that in a negative way, but that's really what it is.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I think also sometimes the private sector uses the term classification,
Right.
And that definitely has a different meaning than the government.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So
Absolutely.
sometimes those terms get interchanged.
Yeah, and we find that's why I'm trying to make the distinction at this point, because I think it's an important distinction
Absolutely.
to consider. And for this organization, absolutely. Okay, we're going to keep moving along. So now we're going to go to corrective action. So these were the things that we came up with working with the customer. Again, we're here even as a vendor, my organization, Fife. We're trying to make the customer smarter. Okay, we can't do it for them. We try to expose what we think best practices are, and for every industry and for every customer, they're different. But then you kind of narrowed it down and figure out, how do I make it successful? And that's really typically our goal. Fully engaged user community. This is something I think they pretty much failed to do in the first two iterations of the records management system. They collaborated with IT, they tried to build their custom thing and didn't really consider how the person's going to use it. And this is kind of interesting in terms of, I mentioned the DoD 5015. The DoD 5015 does not consider the interface. The DoD 5015 considers the background events that take place and the actions that take place to secure records, to categorize records, to review disposition, and so on. They don't really care what the interface is. All right. But you, as a records manager, are very concerned about the interface, because if the interface is so complex that you can't do your work, the records management system is not going to be very good. And also, the real engagement of the community is not to have the community do anything. And I'm saying that's the end user community, because we know the records managers are going to have to do stuff, whether it's e-discovery, whether it's disposition, whether it's freezing documents, and so on. That's really your charter, and you need tools and interfaces to be able to do that. But if you take email journaling, if you do it properly from, let's say, Exchange, the user never knows their emails are being captured as records. You don't want the user community to sit there and categorize records. It'll never happen. It'll be total failure. So in this particular case, we started to engage the user community more, get the feedback from them, and we got most of that feedback through the consultants and the contractors that we spun up in terms of what they needed to know to implement our system. Phased approach, initially addressing email. There's a big elephant out there, and the recommendation is get a piece of it, get successful on a piece of it, and then expand it. Don't try to do everything at one time. And you won't be able to, because you will never know your full inventory of, especially in a large organization that's distributed, either domestically or it's a global organization. Records are all over the place. And the rules in certain countries dictate how that's being managed. So if content is created, let's say in France, you can't take the content out of there. So you have to have links to that content. And so creating this inventory list is instrumental in terms of the long-range success. But you got to figure out, and like I said earlier, email is the easier thing to do. And if you can do that first and demonstrate that success, it's easier to start moving it out and getting the money to do that in the other areas. Investigate third-party decryption plugin and potential integration. I mentioned that earlier. That's kind of how we did it. No one vendor has everything that anybody would ever want in a records management system. And if that records management system also tries to address different areas like e-discovery or case management and other things related to those records, then typically you have other components that are required. It's just like, the manufacturer or the creator or the people like Fife don't build the database. It's not our database. It's not our operating system. We use third-party components to be able to give the user an environment that's acceptable. Integration with identity management system, we talked about that already, but this was the corrective action. This had to be done. They had a specialized identity management system, and that was integrated with the records management system pretty seamlessly, actually. And that's what's one of the important things. It has to be seamless because it has to be real time. You can't be days behind and people are looking at records that they're not supposed to be looking at. Explore exposing all content to additional services. That's the whole idea, again, going back to the thing I mentioned about case management or e-discovery or even declassification. You want to try to head towards a singular repository. When I say that, I don't mean one computer system that has everything on it, okay? You may have multiple ones, and you want to be able to cross those multiple instances and be able to do what is considered a federated search, to be able to look at these different systems that you have, but pull it all in. Now, part of that layer is having content in an external system that has nothing to do with your records management system, but at least in your records management system, you have the metadata to do the retention and disposition. Because if you think of things like large objects, which could be video, it could be huge images, and so on, you're typically not going to move those into your records management system because you need video players, let's say, for a movie or whatever, that can play that. And that's typically not built into the records management system. So you can manage the metadata about it and interface with the custodian of those systems in terms of retention, disposition, freezing, and so on. Utilize auto-categorization, talked a little bit about that earlier, but that reduces the amount of time that people have to manually categorize anything. And that's, an email we talked about, that's from SharePoint, file shares, other kinds of repositories that you have there associated with your legacy applications. Bring that content in and let the system do that. Train contractors. Yeah, we had to train them. That was a corrective action. I think we brought them to a very high level, and that seemed to work. They were very successful in implementing the solution at that point. And again, going back to the DoD 5015.2, again, do you need it in the commercial world? No. Do you need it in every agency within the federal government? No. But we see this is just kind of a quick check mark. You know what, you're getting something. And there's a lot of vendors that are certified in it at different levels. We're certified with all the different chapters in there, and we continue to do it. We've been continuing to do that since 2002. Okay, so the final area of this is the resolution. Okay, in order to get everything moving successfully, we needed to complete the encryption plugin and records management solution integration, deliver a single platform, integrated case management with FOIA declassification, document classification, e-discovery, all those different things. And this particular customer was not heavy into physical records, but they could have added that as another layer within the same environment. Implement interagency and intra-agency for secure collaboration. We talked a little bit about that, and that was very key for particularly things like declassification, where different agencies needed to review those documents. So if anything in an organization's repository that needed to be declassified, okay, that has to do with, let's say, nuclear stuff, the Department of Energy needs to review that as well. And that needs to be this collaboration effort that goes on with easy tracking capabilities and not reproducing these documents over and over and over, because some of it has to be from a FOIA, Freedom of Information Act requirement, needs to be redacted so certain content cannot be seen. Multiple instances with federated searching, mentioned that a few minutes ago, where if your volumes are so large, and let's say you have the 100,000 emails coming in on a daily basis, and let's say you have tons of file shares and SharePoint and other content coming into the system, and all that content, you need to extract the text from all these objects. You need to decrypt some emails. You need to do this, that, and everything else. The idea there is, can the system, a singular system, address all that throughput. And this is a big consideration for this agency. So we decide we're going to split the repository in two. However, give them the ability to federate search. So when I'm looking for content that has to do about a particular subject, some of that information, some of those records are emails, some of them are PDFs, some are Word documents, some are. Okay, so there is this separation, but the ability to federate search, to go and do a search and collect all the information, and if it's for e-discovery, it's for a legal reason, it's for reporting to somebody, some agency, we can lock that down and put a legal hold on it, on everything.
A question related to that, Dean Mitch. And what our user self-describes as an uber geeky question.
It's not a Lyft goofy question?
I got it.
You got it, huh?
Is there a metadata schema you would recommend that best supports a poly-hierarchical categorization? And the reason I bring up that question now is because you're talking about the full text federated search.
Right.
Having that capability makes me think it's probably less important
Yes.
to get so focused on the metadata schema.
Yeah, that's really true. Because again, the more, what do we call, indexing values that you're trying to, levels of indexing values, the categories basically, the more of those that you have, the harder it is to maintain long term. Okay. And then if you want the auto-categorization against that, those rules have to be built into it. Okay, so I'm looking at documents now that are HR documents, but I want to find out where those HR documents are reviews. I want to find out if those reviews are about sexual harassment or something else. And I want, so you can go layer to layer to layer, and you got to manage that and set up all those rules. Whereas I set up this, it's an HR document, it's this disciplinary action, but now all the content from those documents is put into full text. It reduces the amount of this, the poly indexing that you're trying to do. And it becomes a headache, to be honest with you. And that's what we're finding with almost all organizations. They want to simplify. They want to go to this big bucket idea. Right. And not have so many categories. We've lived through the Dewey Decimal System where we had to categorize everything because we'd never find a book if we didn't. And that's the mentality that people still have. We got to still get away from that. It was very cumbersome to maintain. And when things had to change and everything had to be recategorized or whatever, new books came in, it was a very manual process. We want to get away from that. You got to automate it. You got to make this thing as simple as possible for the community and just start addressing all the inventory that you have in a simple way.
Great, thanks.
All right. Exchange email journaling, guaranteeing no ingestion bottleneck. This was very important to them because they have all this email coming in, and what was happening is if you stage the email, the journal the email to another directory on an Exchange server, you're starting to eat up the resources of the Exchange server. If you are journaling it directly by copy, that's how this customer elected to do it in our system, the information flows. But what happens if the line's down? All this stuff gets backed up. And this was a big fear of theirs, given so many emails that they had. So we had to make sure that on our side, we had multiple what we call on-ramp servers, so I can distribute the stream of these journaled emails, and so no one processor was burdened by everything. And this kept things flowing because they just could not afford to back up their email servers. And so this was a very important aspect of what they needed to do. That all leads to discussions with the vendor about what is the configuration, what's the ideal configuration that I'm going to need with the amount of content that I have. The truth of the matter, nobody really knows until you get to the point of implementation. It becomes not rhetorical. Anyway, it becomes something that is kind of unknown, and it's somewhat of an experiment. The vendors will have a pretty good idea what kind of configuration you need, but the exact configuration that everything is going to work and everything is going to go as fast as Google searches go, it probably isn't going to happen out of the box because you're going to continue adding content all the time. That's the beauty, though, I must say, of the cloud, where you have this elasticity that can shrink and grow based on the compute power you need, versus if you're into more of cost rather than capital expenditures, that when you need the processing power, it just goes up. Whereas in a capital expenditure, you're trying to plan 2 years out, let's say, and you got to buy a lot of that stuff up front. So we'll talk more about cloud stuff when we get to some of our other stories that we're going to tell in the next couple of weeks and how they approached it. Large file management, talked about that a little bit. To them it was important because they did have large images, they have video, they have audio, and they don't necessarily want to move that into a repository that's doing all the other stuff. Just keep it out there. They have the tools on those applications, but allow the records system to track the metadata and whatever content is generated in terms of full text from those images. Because sometimes they're description of images, description of video, and you can put that in the system as well for doing discovery. Okay, so that's kind of what this particular customer went through, and some of the challenges, some of the approaches. And again, it's not everything. There's no time to do everything, but it exposes you to some of the challenges and the ways they've approached their requirements. And so this next piece, in the last 10 minutes of our class, it's consciousness checklist. What do I mean by that? Okay, you as the records manager need to be conscious of what you're trying to accomplish. All right. And so in the next 5 classes, today we're going to talk about, have I taken an introspective look at my contributions to my organization's records management program? You are the focal point. And if you're not thinking about this, guarantee it, nobody really else is really. Your lawyers may be thinking about that, but that's kind of a protective mode. They're not looking at it, going forward. They just have problems right now because, there's an inquiry, there is a legal case, and they need to address that as quickly as they can. And then the other ones, have I sought out external sources to help me? Do I have energy to address all the potential record management obstacles? Have I established realistic records management goals? How have my past records management experience influenced my records management philosophy? And you should have a philosophy of what this is about. Hopefully, these kind of classes that we present will kind of help you craft your philosophy and allow you to come up with a plan that will be successful in your organization. So I'm just going to take the first one for today, obviously. And the consciousness checklist here is, and you see in these 7 statements, I, okay? It's all about you. Well, psychoanalysis is what? All about you, right? And so, have I convinced management of records of records management importance? All right. These are all very important things you typically should be asking yourself all the time. Am I relying too much on someone to create my records management plan? Now, if you're part of a records management team, yes, sure, there's a sharing of that, or you're the records management assistant to the records manager, but you're all part of that team. So, you can't totally rely on everybody else to do this, even in your team. You got to be contributing to that. Have I accessed additional resources? What other resources do I have access to that will allow me to improve both my ability to implement records management and maintain records management in a positive way? What are those resources? I'm going to talk about that very shortly. Have I inserted myself into information governance team? A lot of organizations do have an information governance team, which basically sets the overall global policy for that organization in terms of managing information, okay? Managing the information lifecycle. What is it we want to save? What is it we don't care about? What do I identify that are critical, that's critical content for the organization that we have to keep long term? That's what the information governance team does. And it also considers, regulatory information, other guidelines, like it could be NARA. It's a team. It's a very much of a team effort. There's typically comprised of legal, IT, a lot of times not the records managers, amazingly so, and other areas, financial, of the organization, that needs to make sure that the information in their organization is being managed properly and controlled properly. Have I been able to keep up with regulatory changes that govern my industry? Again, I think a lot of that's the information governance team, but I think a lot of it's on your shoulders too, knowing the industry you're in, looking for the sources where the retention disposition, the schedules are defined, and basically, I don't want to say stealing them, but using them, because somebody else has already looked at this too. You don't have to invent everything. Okay, and a lot of times if you go to your local, let's say ARMA chapters or AIM chapters, these things are being discussed all the time, and some people may have already put together a very good retention disposition schedule, and some of it's dictated by, like the FDA in terms of the pharma industry, or it could be your state and local government, for state and local government organizations, and so on. And so things to consider. Do I journal my successes and failures in my records manager role? This is one of the things that I always suggest to records managers. You need to build, in effect, a diary. What was successful, what was not successful, and that's the ownership of your organization. You do this work, but the organization owns it, because if you leave the organization, all right, or if you grow the organization, you want people to understand what was the history, how did we get here, what were our stumbling blocks, how did we get over those stumbling blocks. I think it's important to keep that as a record of your organization. Most records managers do not do it, but I think it's a good journal. And I think even when you leave the organization, if they'll allow you to take that journal with you and implement it somewhere else, I think it's going to be easier to be successful. Have I expanded my external resource pool to accelerate records management attainment? And that basically gets into the next slide. Let us help you help yourself. That's really what psychology is about. They can't necessarily tell you exactly how to address some of your issues, because they haven't lived your issues. Now, the psychiatrists are a little bit different, because they're just going to throw drugs at you, and hopefully, that gets you to a level. I mean, the whole idea behind psychiatry is to get you to a comfortable level where psychoanalysis will work. If you are, really depressed all the time and you need lithium or whatever the case may be, you can't really address some of these problems until you get to a stable point. It's the same thing in records management. You have to get to a stable point before you're able to implement and change things. So these are the things that we suggest. Fight the Records Management University. It's the bang for the buck is great, because we don't charge anything and you can get credit. So I think that's pretty cool. The other ones are ARMA, the Associated Records Management group, and one of our sponsors, and very, very good. They have, if you get to their site, or if you're not a member now, get to their site. They have so much content out there that's very, very helpful. The community contributes to ARMA, on a daily basis, new things to consider, and they have different shows. The national show, I'll talk about that in a second. ICRM, which are the credits that Chris had mentioned before. They have content and information, and kind of help you manage your career in terms of continuing ed. IGP is the Institute for Governance Professionals, another group that's very, very helpful. We have NARA, which is the National Archives, and they have a lot of tremendous content on their site, a lot of good guidelines, especially if you're in the federal government. They have the record schedules, the general record schedule, which is, many arms lengths of record types, categorization. NAGARA is the National Archiving Group, which are, archivists are a little bit different than records managers, and I'll let you self-discover that if you're interested. And state and local archivists as well, in terms of, state has rules, and also your local communities have rules. Let's say your counties do that. And for really checking your sanity, there's the Fife RMU community site, which has a lot of content on it. It's really a sharing environment for records management. I don't even know how many people have registered for it. You just go to the site, you just register. Obviously, there's no charge. And, it's like a blog in essence. And it's a really good sharing area. It's community.fife.com login. And if you can write that down right now, it's not too hard to remember. Or if you request the recordings, which a tremendous number of people do, obviously that will be there. And let me just mention the recordings for a moment. The recordings are the recordings of what we talked about today and the visuals, okay? They are not the PowerPoint slides, okay? We don't necessarily release the PowerPoint slides because it's part of our intellectual property. So I'll clarify that up front for folks. But if you have an absolute need for it, you can contact us and we will consider it. Okay, so upcoming events. Fife has its annual user conference in Philadelphia coming up in a couple weeks. The ARMA National Show is at a great place, the Gaylord in Nashville, Tennessee. So if you like to wear hats and boots, it's a great place to go. I'll be there. And then there's the Knowledge Management World in Washington, D.C., which is a very interesting environment with regards to all kinds of e-content, managing records, discovery, e-discovery, and so on. So it covers a lot of ground, and there's a lot of great vendors there. We'll be there. I suggest if you're in the DC area, you might want to participate in that. Okay, so this is my commercial break. What we have found is I've gone to a lot of shows. I've talked to people on the phone, and we find out that they don't know who Fife is. They don't know what we do. They think Fife is Records Management University. Records Management University is part of Fife. I'm part of Fife. And so what do we do? What do we do at Fife? Okay. We take these, records, all this content and everything else, and create basically a platform to package it up and manage your records. Okay, both electronic and physical on the same system. And we've been developing this probably, I don't know, since 1986. And so we've been very successful. If you're interested, if you're looking for a new platform, or you're looking for some assistance in expanding your platform in certain ways, adding other types of technologies, we can do that for you. And that's all I'm going to talk about in terms of the commercialism of our presentation, because I try to keep this as neutral as possible. Okay, who's next on the couch? Okay, so the next case number 2, is we're small. Is there a comprehensive solution for us? So we looked at this big organization. Now we're going to kind of whittle it down, look at a small organization, and figure out, what can we learn from that particular implementation that we didn't learn or supplement or complement the first one that we did. And don't get depressed. The solution exists, and we'll talk a little bit why that's important with regard to Kay Jameson. Okay, so if you have any other questions, you can pose them now. We're at the top of the hour. We'll try to get to a couple. I don't want to hold you any more than the hour that we anticipated, and like to hear from you. So I'll give you a minute or so to go there.
So Dean, Mitch, we've got a couple questions already in here.
Okay.
So one of them is, where can I find more information about auto-categorization? Someone that's brand new to the records management field.
Okay, so what you'll do is you'll go on Google, like everybody else in the universe, I guess, and type in record auto-categorization. I think that's the best part. What will happen, unfortunately, is you're going to get a lot of vendors' names coming up because they're going to talk about their products. I would rather you go to something like the National Archives, ARMA, all right, and look up auto-categorization. and get their input. Now, I will tell you that what we find with a lot of these organizations that are not necessarily implementing systems, it becomes a little bit too theoretical.
Mm-hmm.
It needs to be looked at, particularly auto-categorization, on a practical basis. What is realistic? But again, the different levels of auto-categorization, email is a little bit different. Like if you're in the federal government, where you're doing it based on what's it called? The
General record schedule, or
no, the hierarchy thing. Capstone.
Capstone.
Yeah, so it's on Capstone where they label different individuals at different levels, and that's all the categorization that takes place. It's particular to email. So, but yeah, I think you're better off going there. And once you're familiar with that, then you can go back to Google and see if there's vendors who might be able to help you.
Okay, great. A couple of people asked, can you show the slide with the trainings again?
Oh, with let's see.
I think those were the upcoming events.
Okay, this one?
Yes.
Okay.
I think a couple of people want to attend those.
Yeah, no. I mean, the FITE, user conference in Philadelphia is more isolated because it's really, our user conference, but we do have users that use our system that are on the broadcast, so I just put it up there. But the ARMA thing is great. It's in Nashville. If you can get there. It's a day and a half for the vendor floor. It probably runs more like 2 or 3 days. I don't remember the full scope of it, but there's really tremendous content there. The important thing of the ARMA show is you get to meet, your contemporaries there. You get to talk about the things that, are challenging to you. I don't remember if they have industry groups or whatever. I mean, there's other ones out there. There's a lot of other ones. If you're in the nuclear industry, there's NERMA. They just had their show. A lot of states have their shows, but shows are really good because you actually get face-to-face time with your contemporaries. Knowledge management world, like I said, look that up. There's a lot of different content in different areas. They are supportive technologies. Okay, I think there's a big, SharePoint aspect of it. And they're like little mini shows within the whole knowledge management. And they call it knowledge management because knowledge management is a little bit different than records management. It's a little bit different than case management, a little bit different than task management. So it's a good forum to learn about the technologies that are really part of the records management scene.
And ARMA also has local chapter meetings, monthly meetings. I'm actually attending one tomorrow in DC. So you can also check out local meetings as well.
The local ARMA meetings are really good. You join. It doesn't cost much. And they're entertaining. You get a meal sometimes too. Any other questions? I guess we got to kind of really wrap, I guess. Do we have other questions?
I tried to get to everybody's question. I would say if I wasn't able to get to it, please engage in the community forum that Mitch mentioned.
Monitors,
Yeah, please post a question there. That's a great way to continue the conversation.
Okay, cool. So final slide. Thank you all for participating today. Hopefully it was, as I like to say, multiple E's: entertaining, enlightening, engaging. There's probably a bunch of other E's in there. We hope you'll come back in 2 weeks. Again, request a recording if you would like to, spend a little bit more time reviewing it. And so our next class is October 1 at 2 o'clock. And on behalf of my friend here, Dean of Admissions, Chris Petty, and myself, thank you all for participating today.
All right. Thank you, everybody.